You're not going anywhere like that, the Alpha King snarled as the Omega walked out in white. The moon hung low over the kingdom of Vera, casting silver light across spiked towers and winding streets. Shadows clung to every corner, curling around stone walls like living things. The wind whispered secrets no one dared speak aloud, and the trees of the surrounding forest swayed as if bowing to an unseen presence. In this world of darkness and power, every movement was watched, every choice weighed. Lyra stepped lightly on the cold cobblestones, her white cloak brushing the ground. She moved like a ghost, though not invisible. The guards at the palace gates followed her with wary eyes. Her hair, dark as the storm clouds overhead, framed a face that held both innocence and fire. She had been born under a curse no one fully understood, and the kingdom had long whispered about the child in white who carried shadows in her blood. She had dreamed of this moment for years. The forest beyond the palace walls called her name, carried in the wind that rattled the banners above. Something waited there, something that had haunted her dreams, whispering of freedom and danger in the same breath. And for the first time she would step into it alone. From his throne high in the palace hall, Kale, the Alpha King, observed her movements. He had ruled Vera for nearly 30 years, his name spoken with awe and fear. His power was absolute, yet Lyra, in her quiet defiance, stirred a storm within him that no crown or sword could contain. He had seen the way she walked, unbent and unbroken, through halls that had made lesser hearts tremble. "You're not going anywhere like that," he snarled under his breath, his voice rough with a mixture of anger and something he refused to name. His fingers tightened around the carved armrest of his throne. "Not without me." But Lyra did not turn. She had always known he would follow, whether he wanted to or not. There was a bond between them, invisible yet undeniable, shaped by secrets and the weight of unspoken truths. She did not need his permission, and he, despite his pride, could not stop himself from chasing what he feared to lose. The palace gates creaked as she pushed them open. The chill of the night wrapped around her like a lover, and she inhaled deeply. The forest lay ahead, dark and inviting, the edges of the trees blurring into the mist. Every instinct in her body urged caution, but her heart demanded courage. She stepped forward. Kale moved faster than she expected, his boots silent despite the stone beneath them. He emerged from the shadows, his presence commanding and dangerous. Moonlight caught the edge of his dark cloak, the symbol of his rule glinting faintly. His eyes, gray as winter steel, held something more than anger, fear, longing, and the unspoken knowledge that he could not let her face this path alone. "Lyra," he called, his voice low, resonant, almost a growl. "Turn back. You don't know what waits for you in that forest." She paused, her cloak fluttering like a banner in the wind. "I know what waits," she replied softly, almost to herself, "and I cannot stay here anymore." Kale's jaw tightened. He had spent years training his mind to control every threat, every whisper of rebellion, but she challenged him in ways no enemy ever could. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to take her hand, to drag her back into safety, but he knew something older, deeper, stirred within her. The curse she carried was part of her, yes, but so was the strength that defied it. "Strength is not always freedom," he said, stepping closer. The scent of his presence filled the air, a mixture of authority and the wildness of storms. "You will not survive what lies ahead without me." Lyra lifted her chin, her eyes reflecting the pale light of the moon. "Perhaps I am meant to survive it alone." Her words were calm, but beneath them burned a fire that even he could feel. It was the fire that had drawn him to her from the very beginning, the fire that threatened to consume them both. For a moment they simply looked at each other, a silence heavy with emotion stretching between them. Kale saw the courage in her stance, the defiance in her gaze, and something inside him shifted. He had always ruled by strength, by fear, but here was a person who could not be controlled, not fully, and yet somehow he was drawn to her anyway. "Then I will follow," he said finally, his voice low and reluctant. But know this, the forest is alive with forces that do not care for crowns or kings. One wrong step and you may not return. Lyra smiled faintly, a shadow of amusement in her eyes. I am not afraid of the forest, Kale. I am afraid of standing still. With that, she stepped beyond the gate, into the mist that coiled around the trees like tendrils of smoke. Kale followed, keeping just close enough to guard her, yet far enough to let her claim her independence. They moved silently, the only sounds the rustle of leaves and the distant cry of an owl. The forest was alive, more than any mere woodland could be. Shadows shifted unnaturally, and the air carried a chill that seemed to seep into their bones. Strange lights danced among the branches, flickering like spirits caught between worlds. Lyra's pulse quickened, not with fear but anticipation. She could feel the magic here, wild and unpredictable, waiting to test her. You feel it too, she whispered, though she did not need to. Kale did. She could sense the tension in his body, the way his senses stretched to catch every sound, every movement. He was a protector by nature, and yet he had no power over the currents that swirled around them. Yes, he admitted, his voice barely audible. It is old magic, dangerous and unforgiving, but it calls to you, does it not? Lyra nodded. It calls to me because I am bound to it, but it does not control me. Their steps brought them to a clearing where the moonlight poured through a break in the canopy, illuminating a stone circle etched with runes that glowed faintly. Lyra knelt within it, placing her hands on the cold stones. The runes flared, responding to her presence, and the wind swirled violently around them, bending the trees and rattling the leaves. Kale stepped forward, hesitant, torn between awe and worry. "Do you understand what you are doing?" he asked. "These runes, they will reveal more than you may wish to see." "I must see," Lyra said, her voice steady. "If I am to be free, if I am to understand this curse, I must face it." The forest seemed to inhale, and shadows gathered at the edges of the clearing. Figures formed from darkness, vague and shifting, whispering secrets in languages long forgotten. Lyra's breath caught, but she did not falter. She met the shadows with open eyes, unafraid, and the air itself seemed to respond. Kale moved closer, his hand hovering near hers, not to stop her but to offer reassurance. He did not touch her, yet the energy between them was electric, a bond that neither could name yet both felt. Then, without warning, one of the shadowed figures stepped forward, its form solidifying into something horrifying yet familiar. It was the wraith of a past Lyra had tried to forget, a memory of loss, betrayal, and sorrow. Its voice was a hiss of wind and shadow. "You cannot escape what you are," it said, whispering her name like a curse. "Your destiny is bound in darkness. Turn back or be consumed." Lyra's hands clenched into fists, but she did not retreat. "I am not afraid," she said, her voice firm. "I will not run." Kale's eyes flickered with both fear and admiration. He knew she might be hurt, might fall, but he also knew this was her choice, her path. And perhaps, for the first time, he understood that love was not about control. It was about standing beside someone, even when the world itself threatened to destroy them. The wraith let out a sound like cracking ice and dissolved into shadows, leaving a stillness that pressed against their chests. Lyra rose, the white cloak flowing like water around her. She was changed, somehow stronger and more luminous, yet the weight of what she had faced lingered in her gaze. Kale exhaled slowly. "You survived." "I did," she said, "and I will survive more, but this is only the beginning." The wind carried a new whisper through the trees, faint and sinister, as if the forest itself had taken notice. Lyra turned her gaze to the horizon, where the faint glimmer of dawn threatened the eternal twilight. She could feel the pull of something greater, something ancient, waiting for her next step. Kale placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. "Then we go forward," he said, his voice low, carrying a mixture of command and promise. "Together." Lyra nodded, though a part of her knew the journey would test every part of them, their courage, their trust, and their hearts. Yet in that shared glance, an unspoken understanding passed between them. They were bound by more than fate. They were bound by choice, by fire, and by shadow. As they disappeared into the deeper forest, the shadows behind them shifted again. Something moved in the darkness, watching, waiting, and whispering Lyra's name with the promise of secrets yet to come. The adventure had only just begun, and neither the Alpha King nor the Omega could know what dangers lay ahead, or how deeply their hearts would be tested. And somewhere in the twisting branches above, a storm began to gather. The forest deepened as Lyra and Kale moved further from the palace. Shadows draped over the twisted trees like heavy curtains, and the air grew colder, thick with magic that pricked their skin and whispered to their thoughts. Every step carried the weight of the unknown, yet Lyra walked steadily, her white cloak bright against the darkness, a beacon in a world of shadow. Kale stayed just behind her, alert and watchful. The forest was alive in a way the palace never had been, moving with intention as though the trees themselves were watching. He could sense it, the pull of the magic, dangerous and unpredictable. Every instinct screamed for him to protect her, yet he knew this was a path she had to walk on her own. But that knowledge did not ease the ache in his chest. "Lyra," he said, his voice low, carrying across the stillness. "This forest, it feeds on what we fear most. You must be careful." Lyra glanced over her shoulder, her eyes calm, though her pulse raced. "I know," she said softly, "but if I do not face this, I will never understand the curse, and I cannot live bound by fear forever." Kale's jaw tightened. He wanted to argue, to force her back to safety, but he saw the determination in her stance. It was impossible to deny. Even the shadows seemed to hesitate before her, as if they respected the courage in her heart. The path narrowed, winding between gnarled roots and stones etched with strange runes. Lyra's hands brushed the ancient markings, and they glowed faintly at her touch. The air vibrated with energy, and whispers drifted through the trees, faint and haunting. Kale's eyes scanned the forest, alert to every movement. "Do you hear them?" he asked. "Voices, old voices. They speak of pain, of loss, of things long buried. We must not let them trick you." Lyra nodded, taking a steadying breath. "They cannot trick me if I do not let them. I am not the frightened child I once was." A sudden gust of wind stirred the trees, and shadows leapt across the ground. From the darkness, forms began to appear, figures twisted and strange, neither fully human nor fully spirit. They circled them, silent and watchful. Lyra's heart did not falter, though the coldness in her veins warned her of danger. Kale stepped forward instinctively, a protective presence at her side. "Stay close," he said. "They will try to test you." The figures moved in a slow, deliberate pattern, surrounding them in a wide circle. Their whispers grew louder, a chorus of sorrow and longing, and Lyra felt it press against her mind, tugging at memories she had tried to forget. Images flashed before her eyes, her family torn apart by the curse that haunted her bloodline, her mother fading into shadow, a younger Lyra crying beneath the heavy weight of fear. She stumbled, her hands gripping her cloak as if it could anchor her. Kale's hand found hers, strong and grounding. "Breathe," he said, his voice steady. "Focus on me, not them, not the past. You are here and you are strong." Lyra closed her eyes, drawing in a deep breath. The whispers tried to pull her down, to drown her in memories, but she held onto Kale's presence, felt the warmth of his hand even through the chill of the night. Slowly, the visions began to fade, though the ache in her chest remained, a reminder of the pain she carried. "You are stronger than they know," Kale murmured, "stronger than I ever imagined." Lyra opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. There was a moment of silence, charged with tension, where the world seemed to hold its breath. The forest itself waited to see what she would do next. Then the ground beneath them trembled. A deep, resonant hum rolled through the roots and stones, vibrating in their bones. From the center of the circle, a figure emerged, tall, cloaked in shadows, its face hidden beneath a hood. Its presence radiated power, older and darker than anything Lyra had ever felt. "The Guardian," Kale whispered. "It tests those who enter. Do not falter, Lyra." Lyra took a step forward, her white cloak shining in the dim light. The figure raised an arm, and the forest seemed to split apart, revealing visions of possible futures. In each vision she saw herself, some triumphant, others broken, some standing with Kale, others alone, consumed by shadow. Her chest tightened with fear, but she did not turn away. "I will not run," she said aloud, her voice echoing in the clearing. "I will face whatever is mine to face." The Guardian's arm lowered, and a deep, resonant voice filled the clearing. "Many have come seeking freedom. Many have turned back. What makes you think you can succeed?" Lyra's gaze did not waver. "Because I have no choice," she said, "and because I will not allow the past to define me." The Guardian's cloak shifted, revealing glimpses of light beneath the shadows. "Then step forward and claim the truth within yourself." Lyra moved into the center of the circle, feeling the magic of the runes surge beneath her feet. The air hummed, and a wind like a living thing wrapped around her, tugging at her cloak and hair. Images from her past, her family, and the curse flickered through her mind, but she met each one without flinching. Kale watched her, every muscle tense, aware of the danger yet unable to intervene. He had always been the alpha, the ruler, the protector, but here he had to trust her. And in trusting her, he discovered something he had never known, the beauty of someone standing strong in the face of darkness. The Guardian raised its hand once more, and the ground opened beneath them, revealing a staircase of light descending into shadow. "Go," it commanded. "Face what lies beneath, and you will know who you truly are." Lyra hesitated for a heartbeat, then stepped forward. The staircase seemed to pulse with energy, each step echoing through her bones. Kale's hand brushed hers again, a silent promise of support, though he knew he could not follow her into this trial. "Be careful," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I cannot protect you here. Only you can face this." Lyra nodded, stepping into the descent. The air grew thick, heavy with magic and memory. She could feel the curse within her, a shadow that had always been a part of her, twisting and whispering, testing her resolve. At the bottom, the chamber opened into a vast cavern, illuminated by a pale, otherworldly light. Crystals grew from the walls, pulsating with energy, and shadows flickered across the surfaces like restless spirits. In the center, a pool of water shimmered, reflecting not their faces but their fears, desires, and secrets. Lyra approached the pool, her reflection shifting with each step. She saw herself as the world saw her, cursed, fragile, alone. Then she saw herself as she truly was, strong, defiant, unafraid. The visions collided, and for the first time she understood the choice before her. "To claim your freedom," she whispered, "I must accept all of me, even the parts I fear." The water rippled, and a shadow rose from its surface, coalescing into a figure that mirrored her own form. It spoke with her voice, but colder, sharper, carrying every doubt she had ever felt. "You cannot control me," the shadow hissed. "You cannot escape what you are." Lyra squared her shoulders, lifting her chin. "I am not you," she said firmly. "I am Lyra, and I will decide my own path." The shadow lunged, and the chamber trembled. Lyra's hands rose instinctively, and energy surged from her, white and pure, meeting the darkness. The clash was violent, not in force but in will, the push and pull of fear, anger, and determination. Kale's voice echoed in her mind, though he was far above, standing at the entrance to the forest. "Trust yourself. Trust what you are capable of." Lyra drew on the strength she had always denied, feeling the curse within her not as a weight, but as a power waiting to be claimed. She pressed forward, and the shadow faltered, dissolving into mist that shimmered with light. The pool stilled, and the cavern grew quiet. Lyra sank to her knees, exhausted but alive, her heart racing. She had faced the curse and survived. She had faced herself, and for the first time felt whole. Yet as she rose, a new sensation prickled at the edges of her awareness, a presence in the shadows beyond the cavern, watching, waiting. The forest was not done with her. Neither, it seemed, was fate. Kale appeared at the entrance, relief and awe in his gaze. He rushed to her side, taking her hands in his. You did it," he said, his voice thick. "You faced it all." He stopped, words failing him. Lyra met his eyes, seeing the storm within him, the mixture of fear, admiration, and longing. "I did," she said softly. "And I am not afraid anymore, but something still waits, something beyond this trial." Kale nodded, understanding without need for words. They had survived the first challenge, but the journey had only begun. Together they would face the shadows that lingered, not only in the forest, but in themselves and in the kingdom they were bound to protect. The wind whispered again through the trees, carrying secrets of danger, magic, and power. Lyra tightened her grip on Kale's hand. "Then we keep going," she said, voice steady. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." And somewhere deep in the forest, a figure moved unseen, its eyes glinting with knowledge of Lyra's true power and the trials yet to come. The palace of Vera seemed smaller now, its towering spires and marble halls unable to hold the weight of the secrets Lyra carried. The forest had changed her, or perhaps she had changed within it. She moved with a quiet confidence that both alarmed and fascinated the courtiers who watched her return. Her white cloak, once a symbol of innocence, now seemed to burn with power, a light that drew the eyes of friend and foe alike. Kale met her at the palace gates, his expression unreadable. Relief flickered in his eyes, but it was quickly replaced by tension. He had expected the forest to test her, but not to reveal the depth of her strength so fully. His kingdom thrummed with whispers, and even he felt the stirrings of unease. "You have changed," he said, his voice low, carrying both awe and warning. "The forest, it has given you power, yes, but it has also drawn attention. Not all of it is kind." Lyra's gaze swept over the city, the streets alive with the golden glow of lanterns and the muted chatter of citizens. "I know," she said softly, "and I do not fear it. But I will not hide what I am." Kale's jaw tightened. He had ruled through control, through fear, through the certainty of power. Lyra's defiance, her refusal to bow or to yield completely, threatened the foundations of that rule. And yet, he could not help but be drawn to her, even more than before. Inside the grand hall, the court waited. Courtiers in rich fabrics and jeweled crowns whispered as Lyra and Kale entered. Some eyed her with suspicion, others with admiration. Among them were those who had long plotted to undermine Kale, to exploit weakness wherever they could find it. And now, they saw a new variable. Lyra, the Omega, the cursed yet radiant figure who had returned from the forest stronger than anyone imagined. "Your Majesty," one advisor said cautiously, bowing, "we are relieved at her safe return." Kale nodded stiffly, his eyes never leaving Lyra. "She has returned because she is strong," he said. "Stronger than any threat this kingdom may face." A murmur spread through the hall. Some nodded in agreement, but others exchanged worried glances. The balance of power had shifted, subtly but unmistakably. Lyra's presence was not simply that of a survivor, it was that of a force that could rival even the Alpha King himself. Lyra stepped forward, meeting the gaze of each member of the court in turn. "I have faced what I needed to face," she said, her voice calm, clear, carrying through the hall. "And I have grown stronger because of it. The curse I bear is part of me, but it does not define me. I will use it to protect this kingdom, not to be bound by fear or shadows." A silence fell, heavy and measured. Kale felt the weight of it pressing down on him. The words were true, but their implications were dangerous. He had always ruled with certainty, yet here was someone whose power and independence could challenge that rule, not through rebellion but through courage and choice. One of the courtiers, a woman draped in dark blue silk, stepped forward. Her eyes were sharp, calculating. "And what of the trials in the forest?" she asked. "Some say those who face the ancient magic never return the same. Can the kingdom trust one who has walked among shadows and survived? Lyra's gaze did not waver. I have returned with knowledge, she said firmly. Knowledge of myself and of the forces that threaten Vera. I am more capable than ever of defending it. Cale felt a surge of pride but also unease. Lyra's words, so honest and unflinching, stirred something in the hearts of those present. They inspired hope, but they also sparked fear. Fear of change, fear of power beyond the known, fear of a future that could not be controlled. Days passed, and the palace became a place of tension and intrigue. Lyra trained in secret, honing the power she had discovered in the forest. Cale observed, torn between concern and fascination. Each movement she made, each skill she mastered, reminded him that he could not shield her from everything. She was no longer just a girl in white. She was a force in her own right. Yet even as they worked side by side, a subtle tension grew between them. Cale wanted to guide her, to protect her, but every time he reached out, she met his concern with calm defiance. It was not rebellion but assertion, a reminder that she was her own person, and he could not command her heart or will. "You are reckless," Cale said one evening as they sparred in the training yard, swords clashing under the fading light. "You take risks that could endanger not just yourself but this kingdom." Lyra parried, her movements fluid, almost dancing. "And yet I survive," she replied, her eyes sparkling with quiet amusement. "Sometimes, to protect what matters, one must take risks." Cale lowered his sword slightly, exhaling. "You are infuriating," he admitted, a hint of a smile breaking through his tension. "But I admire it." Their connection, unspoken yet undeniable, deepened with each passing day. Moments of closeness, a brush of hands, a shared glance, a word said in confidence, carried weight far beyond simple gestures. They were bound not just by circumstance, but by the recognition of strength and vulnerability in each other. But the court watched, and not all eyes were friendly. Rumors began to spread, whispered in hallways and behind closed doors. Some claimed Lyra's power was dangerous, that she could not be trusted. Others feared Cale's attachment to her, interpreting his concern as favoritism or weakness. The seeds of distrust were planted, and the palace began to feel smaller, more constricting, every corridor a trap of suspicion. Then came the accusation. During a council meeting, a high-ranking advisor slammed a hand on the table. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice sharp, "the Omega has consorted with powers unknown. We have reports of strange occurrences near the eastern forest. Some believe she may be conspiring with forces that could threaten Vera itself." The hall erupted into murmurs and protests. Cale's hand moved to Lyra's, and she placed hers lightly atop his, a silent promise that they faced this together. "She seeks only to protect the kingdom," Cale said, standing, his presence commanding. "I have seen what she has endured and the strength she now carries. She is no threat. Only those who fail to see her truth would call her one." The advisor's eyes narrowed. "Majesty, with respect, power alone does not guarantee loyalty. The court must consider the danger she represents." Lyra stepped forward, her cloak sweeping the floor. "I do not need your permission to serve this kingdom," she said, voice steady, carrying through the hall. "I am no longer a child to be judged by whispers or fear. I act for Vera, and I will not be hindered by doubt or suspicion." The room fell silent. Even Cale felt the impact of her words, the force of her resolve. She had claimed her voice, her authority, and it rippled through the halls like a tide that could not be stopped. But not all were swayed. The whispers of danger continued, growing louder with each passing day. Shadows in the corridors, eyes that watched from balconies, hands that lingered too long near weapons, all signs that the kingdom's peace was fragile. And Lyra, despite her courage, felt the weight of it pressing down on her, a reminder that power always drew envy and fear. Cale sensed it too. Every step she took, every moment she asserted herself, reminded him of both the strength and vulnerability she carried. He wanted to protect her, to shield her from the scheming and suspicion, yet he knew that doing so might suffocate the very independence that made her powerful. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Lyra walked the palace gardens alone. The lanterns flickered in the growing darkness, casting long shadows across the stone paths. Cale followed quietly, giving her space, yet close enough that she felt his presence as a constant. "You carry more than just the curse now," he said softly. "You carry the hopes of the people, the weight of the court, and my concern whether you wish it or not." Lyra stopped, turning to face him. "I carry what I must," she said, her eyes meeting his. "And you do not have to bear it alone. But you also cannot protect me from everything. I am not a child anymore, Cale. I am the Omega, yes, but I am also Lyra." Cale studied her, his chest tight with unspoken emotion. "I know," he said quietly, "and yet I fear for you anyway." "That fear does not make me weak. It makes me human." They stood in silence, the wind rustling through the leaves, the shadows growing longer, heavier. There was trust between them now, yes, but also a recognition that the path ahead was perilous. Allies could be enemies, power could be a weapon, and the forest had already shown them that magic and destiny were not easily tamed. Then a messenger arrived, breathless and trembling. "Your Majesty, the Eastern Forest," he said, eyes wide. "The shadows, they have moved. People have vanished, and there are whispers of the Omega being involved." Lyra's hands clenched into fists, and Cale's expression darkened. The trial of the forest had strengthened her, yes, but it had also drawn the eyes of forces that would not rest until they tested her further. Cale's grip on her hand tightened. "We will face it," he said, "together, but you must be ready for what comes next. Loyalties will break, hearts will be tested, and the kingdom itself may tremble." Lyra nodded, her eyes steady. "I am ready," she said. "Whatever comes, I will not run. I will face it." And somewhere in the shadows of the palace, unseen eyes watched. The kingdom's delicate balance of power had shifted, and the whispers promised that the next challenge would not be one they could meet lightly. The eastern forest had grown restless. Even from the palace walls, Lyra could feel the tremor of magic beneath the soil, alive and urgent. The shadows whispered her name, not with threats but with promise of trials that would test not only her strength but her heart. Cale rode beside her, silent and watchful, his black cloak flapping in the wind. His eyes, usually so controlled and commanding, flickered with unease. The kingdom they had both fought to protect now seemed fragile, the trust of the court hanging by threads as rumors from the forest reached their gates. "This place," Lyra murmured, her gaze scanning the dark trees ahead. "It is not the same as before. The magic here, it hungers." Cale tightened his grip on the reins. "Then we must be stronger than it, together." The forest swallowed them, shadows twisting around their path as if alive. Lyra felt the pulse of the magic beneath her feet, resonating with the power she had claimed in the depths of the earlier trial. It was a dangerous, thrilling sensation, and she met it with steady breath. She was no longer frightened of the curse. She had made it a part of her, shaping it into strength. The trees opened into a clearing, and Cale's eyes widened. Before them stretched a battlefield unlike any he had seen, an open space where the shadows themselves seemed to take form, gathering like storm clouds ready to strike. Figures, indistinct yet threatening, shifted in the gloom, moving with unnatural precision. Lyra dismounted and stepped forward, white cloak flowing, sword in hand. The forest had brought her here for a purpose, and she would not hesitate. Cale followed, silent and deliberate, his own sword drawn, the light of authority and power radiating from him like a shield. "Remember," he said softly, almost to himself, "fear is a weapon the shadows use. Do not let it control you." Lyra nodded, taking a deep breath. "I will face them, and I will not fall." The first wave of shadows surged forward, their forms twisting between darkness and half-light. Lyra met them head-on, her sword slicing through the night, a brilliant arc of white against black. Magic erupted from her hands, not destructive, but guiding, turning the attacks away from those she sought to protect. Kale fought beside her, a storm of steel and shadow, moving with precision that only decades of rule could teach. They were in perfect rhythm, a partnership forged in trust and fire. Each strike, each movement, revealed not just skill, but a bond that went beyond words. Yet the shadows were relentless. They struck at weaknesses, tested boundaries, whispered doubts in voices that seemed to echo from the deepest corners of memory. Lyra faltered for a moment, a shadow brushing against the edges of her mind, reminding her of loss, of family, of every fear she had once carried. Kale's hand found hers again, gripping tightly, grounding her. "You are stronger than they are," he said. "Stronger than fear, stronger than doubt. Trust yourself." With a surge of determination, Lyra channeled the power of the curse she had embraced. A wave of light spread from her, pushing the shadows back, forcing them to retreat, though not disappear entirely. The forest shook with the energy, leaves falling like silver rain, the air humming with magic. In the midst of the chaos, a larger figure emerged, a being of pure shadow, taller and more solid than the rest, radiating a power that felt like it could undo the world. Its voice was a thunderous echo. "Lyra of Vera," it boomed, "you cannot control what you were born to carry. Turn away and surrender to the darkness within or be consumed." Lyra squared her shoulders, her sword held high, her eyes burning with clarity and resolve. "I do not surrender to fear. I do not surrender to shadows. I am Lyra, and I claim my power, my choice, my life." The shadow lunged. The world seemed to hold its breath as light and darkness collided. Lyra felt the power of her curse, tempered by courage, burn within her, and she struck, not with anger but with understanding, channeling every fear, every memory, and every ounce of strength into a single surge. The shadow screamed, splitting apart into fragments that scattered like mist across the forest floor. Kale stood beside her, catching her when she swayed, his eyes filled with relief and admiration. You did it," he whispered, voice thick. Lyra exhaled, exhaustion and triumph mingling in her chest. She looked around. The shadows were gone, the forest still trembling, but alive with a quiet energy that spoke of balance restored. The trial had ended, yet she knew the world would never be simple again. Kale helped her stand, their hands intertwined. "The kingdom, your path, it is safe now." "For the moment," he said, a small smile tugging at his lips. Lyra nodded, feeling the weight of the battle and the clarity it brought. "Yes, but I know there will be more trials. This forest, this power, it is part of me and the world will challenge me again. I am ready for that." Together, they walked back to the palace, the first hints of dawn brushing the horizon. Light spilled over the land, touching the towers and streets with gold and silver, a quiet promise that the night, no matter how long, always ends. The court watched them return, awe and fear mingling in equal measure. Whispers died in their mouths as Lyra stepped forward, confident and radiant, the proof of her strength evident in every movement. Kale followed, standing taller than ever, not just as a king, but as a protector and partner to someone who had faced impossible odds and survived. But even as the dawn broke, a subtle unease lingered. Somewhere, deep in the forest beyond the palace walls, shadows stirred, waiting for the next test. Lyra had faced the curse, she had embraced her power, and she had fought beside Kale. But destiny was never finished, and the balance between light and darkness was fragile. In the quiet moments that followed, Kale and Lyra stood together on a balcony overlooking the kingdom. The city was waking, the streets filling with people who had lived in fear and now looked to hope. Kale turned to her, eyes softening, a rare vulnerability in his gaze. "You have changed everything," he said, "not just for yourself but for all of Vera. You have brought hope, strength, and perhaps even me along with it." Lyra smiled, a mixture of warmth and quiet strength. "And you have shown me what it means to trust, to stand with someone who fears for you and yet lets you be yourself." For a moment, words were unnecessary. They simply stood together, hand in hand, feeling the wind, the light, and the power of survival. The trials had been brutal, the stakes high, but they had endured. They had grown, not just in power, but in understanding, in trust, and in love that neither of them had dared to name aloud until now. The kingdom was safe, at least for now. The shadows were held at bay. The curse within Lyra was her own, no longer a threat but a tool of strength, and Kale had learned that true leadership was not control, but protection, guidance, and respect. And yet in the quiet corners of the forest, a whisper of magic remained, faint but alive, reminding them that peace was fragile and that destiny never truly rested. Kale pulled Lyra close, his voice low. "Whatever comes next, we face it together, you and I. No matter the shadows, no matter the trials." Lyra leaned against him, feeling the steady warmth of his presence. "Together," she agreed, her voice soft but firm. The first full dawn in decades bathed the kingdom in light. The streets of Vera stirred with life, hope glimmering in the eyes of its people. The darkness had been tested, the curse had been embraced, and two hearts bound by trust and trial had emerged stronger, ready to face whatever the world would demand next. And somewhere in the distance, the wind carried a whisper, soft but certain, that magic, destiny, and the echoes of past shadows would never cease. But Lyra and Kale were ready. Together, they could face anything. The kingdom of Vera had endured storms of magic, shadow, and doubt. Now it would see a new era, not of fear, but of courage, strength, and the quiet, unyielding power of hearts that had chosen each other against every odds. And in the stillness of the dawn, they finally allowed themselves a moment to breathe, to hope, and to imagine a future where darkness no longer ruled, and where love and trust were the greatest magic of all.